And good morning, good morning, good evening, Mr. Chair, and committee members. Welcome to this evening's meeting. We are just about to get started. The live stream is currently running. I will run through quickly just the list of participants that we have here tonight. So I confirm we do have quorum, and all committee members are present with the exception of Councillor Holland currently and Councillor Osanik, who did inform me she will be late to this evening's meeting. So currently with us tonight, we have Sheila Kidd, Commissioner of Transportation and Public Works, Ian Semple, Director of Transportation Services, Matt Cusson, Manager of Transportation Policy and Programs, Marissa Mascaro, Manager of Transportation Infrastructure, Janet James, Deputy City Clerk, Ian Sullivan, our host this evening, Technical Consultant Jamie Garcia, as well as myself, Julia McCarty-Jansman, Committee Clerk. We currently have one member of the public with us at this time, and I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, to start the meeting.
Yes, thank you, Julia. And welcome committee members, members of staff, welcome to the members of the public. I think we're all aware that during these difficult times, getting public engagement, it can be a challenge. So anyone that does show up should be celebrated. So thank you for coming. We're going to go to the agenda in a second. There is only one item of business. We always follow the same process, same procedure. This, I believe, is Julia's first EITP meeting, but it is not her first committee meeting, so it should be fairly straightforward. Councillor Neal is the vice chair. Oh, hello, Councillor Holland. How are you doing? It is not listed in the agenda, but Councillor Neal is the vice chair, so I may have him take over if I need to speak as Sydenham District Councillor. And with that, we'll just go through the agenda. So the first thing is to call it to order, which we've done. It was on time. We've introduced the members. 5 out of 6 members are present, members of staff and members of the public, and we have an agenda to approve. So we need a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor. Moved by Vice Chair Councillor Neal, second by Councillor Osterhoff. So there's only the one item, so it's hard to imagine we might want to make any changes, but does anyone want to make any changes? I don't see anyone, so we'll approve the agenda. All those in favor? Mr. Chair?
Just to confirm that does include the addendum that I sent out this afternoon.
Very good point. So there was an addendum this afternoon. Did everyone have a chance to see the addendum? It was a letter of correspondence from a Ms. Sharkey, who will most likely be in attendance tonight, I'm guessing. Anyways, it's in the addendum. It's a letter of correspondence. So we need to approve the agenda with the one item in the addendum as well. So we're approving with the addendum. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. So now we have to confirm the minutes from April 13th, our last meeting 2 months ago. So April 13th, 2021, we need a mover and a seconder to get the minutes on the floor. It has to be, the mover has to be someone that was present. So moved by Councillor Doherty, second by Councillor Holland. Did anyone notice any errors or omissions to the minutes? I'm not seeing anything, so we'll approve the minutes. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, are there any delegations?
Mr. Chair, no, there are not.
Thank you. I do notice there's a briefing in the agenda, so we're going to briefings now. We'll hear from Mr. Cusson, who is the Manager of Transportation Policy and Programs, and he is going to speak to us about the one item of business, which is traffic calming policy and guidelines. Mr. Cusson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wait for the PowerPoint to come up here. Perfect. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening to the committee and members of the public. My name is Matt Cusson, and I'm a Manager of Transportation Policy and Programs. And tonight I'll be providing a briefing on the proposed updates to the traffic calming policy and development of new traffic calming guidelines. Next slide, please. So as a quick recap of how we got to where we are now, in 2019, the Road Safety Plan and Active Transportation Implementation Plan called for a review of the traffic calming policy to develop a more effective means of addressing traffic calming requests. So in the spring of 2020, an RFP was issued and awarded for technical consultant services to support this review. A preliminary review of the existing policy was brought forward in the fall of 2020 to EITP. In February of this year, an update report was also brought forward to EITP that outlined the direction of the new policy and guidelines. And in April, a draft of the policy and guidelines were released for public consultation. And the city invited residents to take a short survey and ask questions through an interactive question and answer tool. We had over 500 residents that completed the survey, and 929 comments and 25 questions were received by staff. Staff analyzed and themed this feedback, which was summarized as part of the reporting back document released on the Get Involved page and attached as Exhibit C, and was integrated into the draft policy and guidelines that are before you tonight. And tonight, we're here to present the final draft policy and guidelines for consideration. Next slide, please. So the proposed traffic calming policy outlines how traffic calming requests will be reviewed and considered by the city, while the guidelines serve as a catalog for traffic calming approaches and include details for each measure. So collectively, the approach to traffic calming that's before you tonight favors action that directly prioritizes pedestrian and cyclist safety in neighborhoods by slowing motorists down. And the approach favors interventions that can be more easily modified and presents traffic calming in the context of being one of a number of components of the city's transportation system. So along these lines, it's important to note that the policy and guidelines are not meant to be a catch-all for all transportation issues. However, they are an important step in building a more connected network that prioritizes active transportation. Next slide, please. So the toolkit of traffic calming measures has been significantly expanded from what's in the current policy, and it consists of 27 distinct traffic calming tools. So these were selected based on best practices in other municipalities and gave consideration for the Kingston or local context. The tools have been grouped into 3 different categories based on their intended use, and I'll talk about each of them in the following slides. Next slide, please. So type 1 measures are effective installations that are often temporary or seasonal in nature and can be more quickly and easily implemented compared to, say, more permanent measures that we might otherwise consider. So these would include vertical centerline treatments, which are also known as traffic calming bollards, pavement markings, on-road pavement messaging, speed display devices or driver feedback signs, and changeable message signs as well. Next slide, please. So type 2 measures are physical changes that are more permanent in nature and typically involve more resources and longer timelines to plan, design, and construct, and would be considered as part of broader future capital projects. So these include horizontal deflections, such as curb extensions, vertical deflections, such as speed humps or speed cushions, intersection treatments, such as raised crosswalks or curb radius reductions, and cross-sectional treatments, such as lane narrowing or on-street parking. Next slide, please. So community-based initiatives is the third grouping, and they involve tools and programs that residents could implement with support from the city. So this approach reflects a desire from residents and community groups and other stakeholders to address concerns in an area where city-led initiatives are not yet planned or committed. So there are 4 community-based measures that are recommended to be developed and offered to residents as part of the recommended policy. So they include a program that would allow residents to display a city-issued lawn sign to encourage motorists that are passing by to slow down. It includes a local traffic only implementation that discourages cut-through traffic. It also includes a pace car program that offers an opportunity for residents to demonstrate their commitment to driving the speed limit. And the fourth that's been put forward is an initiative that highlights alternative locations for school pickup and drop off called the Park and Stride program. Next slide, please. So the proposed policy identifies the need to define the root issue of transportation concerns that are raised. So when a neighborhood transportation issue is raised and brought forward to the city, staff would conduct an initial review that considers available traffic data, solutions that may have been previously implemented, any relevant policy that applies, and plan capital work that may be in the area. If the primary issue is determined to be speeding or a traffic volume issue in nature, traffic calming approaches may be considered in a few different ways. So one is that city councilors may select the roadway for a traffic calming implementation as part of the proposed annual process, which I'll explain in a bit more detail in the following slides. Concerns also may fall within neighborhood program areas, such as those that fall within the catchment of schools that are participating in the city's Safe Routes to School program. They would be captured for further review as part of that implementation. Community-based initiatives as another kind of option would be available to interested residents, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And then lastly, concerns may be considered as part of longer-term neighborhood and capital planning. So this is where type 2 measures might be considered as the scope of broader capital implementations may involve the use of type 2 measures as part of that broader work. Staff may also consider the use of type 1 measures to address safety issues as they arise on local roads as well. Next slide, please. So through the district selected street process that I mentioned in the last slide, city councilors will be able to select one local street in their district for a type 1 implementation each year. So this intake process is intended to be flexible. So I'll just outline the general approach and typical process that's discussed in the report. So councilors will receive a list of locations where speeding and volume related neighborhood transportation concerns have been raised by residents within their district, and staff can provide further context and data if it's available on any candidate location as needed. Once a street has been selected, staff would then develop an implementation plan that includes the selection of type 1 measures and the design specific to the local road that's been selected. Baseline data may then be collected where appropriate to determine the before conditions of the roadway. Residents living adjacent to where traffic calming is planned would receive information about the plan measures in advance of implementation and would have an opportunity to provide feedback or ask questions about the proposed plans. Measures would then be installed and applied in the late spring and into the summer. And where possible, data would be collected to determine any changes in motorist behavior after the measures have been installed. Staff would continue to intake feedback from the community post-installation and make any adjustments to the measures as needed. And observations and feedback collected over the following months would be shared with councilors in the spring of the following year. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that the existing traffic calming policy permits councilors to request 2 candidate streets for assessment within their district each year. And as a result of the resourcing that's been required to gather the data and complete a detailed assessment, and the use of traffic calming tools that have largely been limited to speed humps in practice, traffic calming measures currently are only being implemented along 3 to 4 streets per year, with many nominations not scoring high enough to be considered for implementation. So in contrast, the proposed approach that's before you tonight enables the implementation of at least 12 traffic calming measures each year in neighborhoods across Kingston using type 1 implementations and measures. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, so pending the adoption of the proposed traffic calming policy and guidelines, the new traffic calming policy would replace the existing policy and would supersede any processes that are outlined in the existing policy. So staff will begin to develop the associated traffic calming programs that are included as part of the new policy, including the district selected street process and the community-based initiatives. So these programs would start at various points over the next year. So the district selected street selection process would begin in Q4 of this year with implementation in Q2, Q3 of next year. The lawn sign program is slated to launch or begin in Q3 of this year. The pace car program in Q4 later this year. Local traffic only initiatives, the process would is slated to begin in Q4 2021, so later this year, with implementation taking place in Q2, Q3 of next year. And the Park and Stride program would intend to launch in Q3 or Q4 of this year, pending school capacity to participate. So each of these programs will have their own communications plan and would be shared with residents inquiring about traffic calming in their neighborhood as each program is launched. For future capital planning, any type 2 measures or capital projects that include type 2 measures would need to be considered as part of future capital plans. And in terms of neighborhood level programs, the Safe Routes to School program is planned to restart in September at Trudell Public School, Mother Teresa Catholic School, and Lancaster Drive Public School. Next slide, please. So that concludes my briefing to you tonight. I'm certainly available to take any questions. I'm also here with Marissa Mascaro, Transportation Infrastructure Manager, Ian Semple, Director of Transportation Services, as well as Commissioner Kidd, who are also available to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cusson. You're a very good presenter, my compliments. So we have questions from members of the committee, but before we get there, I just want to be clear on procedure. Madam Clerk, are members of the public permitted to ask questions in the briefing section or only when it's an item of business?
Mr. Chair, so the briefing section, we will get questions from councillors or committee members, and then in the business item, members of the public will have an opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I was pretty sure that was the case. And also on the business item, of course, councillors can ask questions. So I would suggest that in this section, we ask questions for clarification of the presentation and for further clarification of the report and the implications and what it means to your district and all that stuff. Those questions should be maybe with the item of business because the members of the public will want to participate in that section. So at this point, I'll entertain questions about the presentation and the content therein, and sort of high-level questions about the item in general. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I have two high-level questions. The first one, which is sort of related to the presentation, is regarding the, I guess the intersection or the how the overlap between the Safe Routes to School program and prioritization of neighborhood streets. I'm going to use my district as an example, though I know we're not really at that point in the meeting, but just to say that, there are streets that are obviously more, where more traffic is related to accessing the school, the new high school in the district, but yet it's not a part of the Safe Routes to School implementation at this point. So is the overall approach to Safe Routes to School to review every area and try to work with the neighborhood on those streets, on potential streets that could be improved for traffic safety and prioritization of pedestrians. Is that part of this approach, or are they very separate?
Thanks, Councillor Holland, and through you, Mr. Chair. So good question, Councillor Holland. In terms of the Safe Routes to School program, so it is a very specific multi-year program that considers a number of different factors. So certainly, engineered-based changes are part of it, but it's a relatively intensive program where we look at education considerations, encouragement, and other ways in which we can kind of promote and encourage more typically elementary students to walk or bike to school, and to do so in a confident and a safe way. In terms of more broadly, so that particular program right now has launched at Trudell Public School and Lancaster Drive Public School, as well as Mother Teresa. The program itself is kind of on pause right now, given obviously the constraints that we've been under with COVID. We're looking to kind of resume that in September. More broadly than just the Safe Routes to School program, the Park and Stride program is listed as a community-based initiative, and it's intended to help distribute some of the congestion that would typically be seen at a school like KSS or really in any other kind of school zone that we have in the city, to identify some alternative locations where parents could pick up and drop off their kids that are safe and connected to the school itself through existing infrastructure. So that's an opportunity where if a school was interested in promoting some alternative locations for pickup and drop off to get at a congestion issue, that would be a program that's included as part of what's before you tonight, that we may be able to get at some of those concerns through that particular initiative if the school was interested in promoting that.
Okay, so the Safe Routes to School is not the only way to deal with traffic calming issues around the school, is basically what you're saying. So yes, Councillor Stroud, that's correct. Certainly, through the Park and Stride program is one alternative. The Safe Routes to School program is as I mentioned, a multidisciplinary kind of approach. A councillor could certainly request a street that is fronting a school or a longer route to school as part of their district selected street as well. And we would review any concerns that come in from a school area, as we do on a regular basis, as part of our normal review process for concerns that come into the city. Councillor Hall.
Thank you. Yeah, and the Park and Stride that's wonderful. I mean, I know that there have been capacity issues over the last year for good reason. The other question is just really super high level, thinking about traffic calming in general. I know that when this review of the policy first started, we were dealing with the fact that not just like the past policy wasn't doing as much as we wanted it to, but also very dynamic environment for transportation. So the question really is, in the future, hopefully not too far off future, but let's just say in the ideal future, it seems as though traffic calming is something that we're trying to get away from, and we're trying to move more in the direction of design as an approach to pedestrian safety and encouraging active transportation. Is that what am I correct in that assessment of the current policy or the proposed policy?
So, Councillor Holland, a good question as well. I would suggest that it's the approach that we're taking with traffic calming and what's before you tonight is to take more of an integrated approach. So we're not looking at traffic calming as necessarily an isolated measure. It's one of a number of different ways in which we can get at transportation issues And it needs to be considered as at that level where we're also considering, potential pedestrian crossings and other changes that may be more appropriate to the issue that's at hand, or that integrates, better into some of those longer term plans that we do have. So it's not necessarily about moving in a particular direction, but more about taking that integrated approach and not having traffic calming be the only or the kind of catch-all for all transportation issues that we review.
Thank you. And yeah, for the time being, we'll go to 2 questions per member. And if there's more, and it can't wait until the business segment, then we might do a second round of questions. I did see Councillor Doherty's hand earlier. I believe all the councillors have questions. So we'll go Councillor Doherty, then Councillor Neal, then Councillor Ostrom. Councillor Doherty.
Excellent. Thanks for that. I had lots more questions than 2, but I'll keep it to 2. So type 1 was, first of all, Matt, I want to thank you for all the emails I wrote to you and for all of the answers and your patience with me, because I did receive a lot of feedback in my district after the type 1, the bollards were introduced in Calvin Park. And so I just want to share with you a couple of the comments, and then I have a couple of questions. One is it was concern I heard from several people about cars parking too close to the bollards that these concerns, but it's important for other councils to hear this too. And the most concerns were from the lack of engagement beforehand. I know there were cards hung on doors to communicate that this was going on, but people felt that they were not engaged in the process and they weren't ready. And all of a sudden these bollards were up and they were taken by surprise. And I just wonder, you said that there is going to be a communication plan, and could you share a little bit more about that? And have you incorporated that feedback from the experience in Calvin Park?
Thanks, Councillor Doherty, for the question, and certainly we've appreciated hearing, I think, from residents on this, and have worked with a number of residents, through some of the initial concerns that they had. I think in terms of a proposed approach, kind of going forward. So, as part of the district selected street process, it follows a similar approach in terms of making sure that residents living on adjacent streets are informed and have an opportunity to provide feedback, both before and after the implementation. So certainly before, in terms of leaving kind of door-to-door door tags and information at the door, but also after the measures are implemented. These measures, unlike permanent changes that we've considered in the past, we actually are able to make changes and respond to concerns in a more reasonable and expedited way than we have been able to with some of the other measures that we've had in the past. So we certainly encourage residents to share feedback before, but also once the measures are in place. Of course, it does take some time for residents to adjust to measures that are installed, and certainly whenever there's a change out in the right of way and in the road, it can take some time. But certainly, we've been able to review any concerns that have come in and are able to make those adjustments if there are specific concerns around access or otherwise. In terms of the parking piece, we've certainly encouraged residents through our initial information that we've shared to encourage them not to park near the bollards. It certainly can take some time, and we've worked through some of those concerns as we've heard them from residents in some of the areas where we've implemented those bollards.
Great, thanks. So my second question is, if your communication plan can include counselors, as soon as you have identified a street and you've developed I guess you'll just be using the same literature all the time once you get going anyhow. But if you could forward that to us, and then we can share it with anybody who has a neighborhood association, for example, we can actually help with, you know, to share the information, but also to garner feedback from residents as well. So let's work on this together. That would be really helpful. Thanks.
Yes, Councillor Neal.
Thank you. A couple of questions. My first question is this meant primarily for neighborhood streets? And the reason I'm asking that is I share Sir John A. Boulevard. Hopefully we'll change the name of that in the near future. But Councillor Doherty and I share that. Johnson Street, Councillor Stroud and I share that. And I'm just wondering if there are traffic issues on both of those streets. I'm just curious whether this is something that, or is it primarily meant for neighborhood streets?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Neal, and through you, Mr. Chair. So that's correct, Councillor Neal. The policy and the district selected street process is specific to local roads. That is where it applies. Okay, we'll have to get on those other issues another way, I guess. And I'm curious about the length of the proposed street. And the reason I ask is there's a petition that's already been gathered for Regent Street in my district about a need for traffic calming. And there's more and more children that live on that street. Now that is a street that goes from Johnson all the way to Princess. Are there concerns that you have about the potential length of a local street? Thanks for the question, Councillor Neal. That's a good one. And through you, Mr. Chair. So we haven't set out a predetermined distance for the district selected street process. We certainly, would consider the nature that on a case-by-case basis, consider the nature of the local road, and we wouldn't look to, cut that measure off at a particular predefined point. That would be something that we would evaluate as part of the design process once that street is selected, to make sure that we're installing the measures where they make sense to. So we purposefully haven't included a specific cutoff, so to speak, and are not particularly concerned, with a length. It's more about from the transportation network standpoint where it would make sense to have that implementation. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stroud, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thanks, Matt, for your presentation. Excellent job. Obviously, as a rural councillor, I probably don't have as much involved here, but always thinking with a rural lens, and maybe I missed something along the way because I don't know everything about this program, but you mentioned scoring high enough to merit traffic calming measures. And I know we have a couple of locations in the rural area, mostly Elginburg area, and I appreciate that. And it merited enough for that, which is great. Is there, in the rural perspective, do you consider adjusting the lens a little bit, because we're not likely to have the volume of an urban area, but enough to cause concerns for rural expectations, for safety? Is that something you're willing to adjust or have considered?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Oosterhoff. That's a good question. So in terms of when I spoke to in the briefing about scoring, so I was referring to the previous process where there was a robust kind of scoring process that was in place. So with the new policy approach, counselors have the ability to select a street. So it wouldn't go through that same kind of scoring process that it may have gone through in the past. And I guess specific to the rural area, in terms of the district selected street, what we've indicated in the policy in the report is that we would consider our rural hamlets on a case-by-case basis. So it depends on the context of kind of what we're looking at, but certainly it's something that we would want to work with you and every other counselor on. But certainly in the rural hamlet area, where we would evaluate that on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I had that hamlet's written on the bottom and circled, so I thought there would be that consideration. And again, if this is off topic or not at the right time, let me know, Mr. Chair. But on the local traffic only, I'm drawn to that because maybe we don't really have areas in the rural area that might. But we do have what we call, and I think Ian knows about this, a lot of speeding areas on crosscut roads. And unfortunately, I blame everybody come South Frontenac that way coming through and not considering our roads. But everybody racing through to get to the other side of town, wherever they might live. And would we consider that for certain roads where we are experiencing considerable safety speeding and where our police traffic division is struggling to be successful, like Lehman Road, for example, is one of the most common ones. I could probably think of 3 more in a minute, but is that something that you have a coordinated effort, or is that outside of this really, where people use the roads unnecessarily almost?
So thanks for the question, Councillor Stroff. In terms of the local traffic only implementation, so I'll be cautious in saying that we haven't developed the details about what that exactly looks like, what that process is to intake those roads. So it's not been kind of, that's part of the development that needs to happen. Certainly, pending the adoption of the policy and guidelines tonight. For us to be able to develop that criteria and what that exactly looks like from a material standpoint, it would be something that would rely on the local traffic only signage that's in place. So it wouldn't be something that could be enforced by police. It would be an effort certainly to suggest to vehicles that are looking to use a particular road that may not be suited for cut through traffic, to suggest for them not to do so. But it isn't necessarily going to kind of solve or completely mitigate cut through issues that are long-standing or pre-existing.
Okay, yeah, no, I see it a little clearer. That helps me, and I appreciate what I've heard. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Semple, you had your raised hand up. Did you want to add something to that question?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hudson answered it for me.
Okay, great. Yeah, okay. I have one question, Mr. Hudson, about the district selected process. So, and again, we're all familiar with the old system. So once I was elected in 2014, it was explained to me, I think it was explained to me by the previous councillor actually, that it sort of was a unique to Kingston sort of system where each councillor could select 2 roads a year. They go through this rigorous, or as you say, robust selection process, but most of them would not get through that screening, which was, fact and evidence based and measured and all that. And you'd see less implementation than in the proposed framework. So there was a slide that I thought that I understood, but I just wanted to go back to that. So rather than 3 to 4 streets in Kingston a year getting specific treatment, good engineering treatment, it would be each councillor automatically would be accepted for 1 street, but 1 street only per year, right? So like whatever, and they'd have to think about it carefully, but whatever street it was that they selected would get some kind of, and is it only level 1 or type 1 treatment that would be implemented, or does that depend on the assessment by traffic, by you guys?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Stroud. Both good questions. So to confirm, yes, councillors would select the street rather than nominate the street. Distinct difference between the current policy and what is proposed tonight. And in terms of the measures that are used, yes, it would be type 1 measures that would be considered. And staff, after that street is selected, would be putting forward what that implementation looks like, but it would consider the use or the toolbox, so to speak, of type 1 measures.
Right. So effectively what that means is there is no process for a councillor to initiate a type 2 measure that would have to come out of the larger strategic planning that the city's doing and the overall transportation master plan and active transportation master plan and other plans that inform the department. So it couldn't be initiated by district council.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Stroud, yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right, so that's 2 questions each. Remember, we're going immediately to the business item for this and the report, so we can ask more questions. So I would suggest that we move to business item 7. If you have a question again about the framework that was presented specifically, and explanations about what we just heard and that kind of thing, raise your hand now. Otherwise, we'll go to business, and then pretty much all questions to do with the policy will be in order. Councillor Doherty.
Just a few more clarifications. So Van Order Drive received the type 1 measure this year. So what happens in October? Are you going to take the bollards down? Are you going to take the discs on the road down as well? And will they be erected next year again, and then we get an additional road, or will they be gone and that's it for Van Order Drive, for example?
Good question, Councillor Doherty, and through you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of the bollard question, so yes, the bollards would are seasonal, so they would come down in time for when the snow flies. In terms of how we're kind of collecting feedback and bringing that forward, so we will, as part of this proposed process, and certainly for Van Order would apply to this, we would bring back any feedback that we've heard over the implementation period, bring that back to you as a councillor, and any data or pertinent information that we've collected, as well as staff. And at that point, certainly if there were major issues or long-standing issues that we had heard throughout the implementation period, that would be a discussion as to whether or not those measures would be reinstalled in the spring. But the default would be, certainly if the implementation was effective from a speed standpoint, and from an implementation standpoint, from the feedback that we've received, the implication or default would be that we would reinstall that installation again in the spring. So it wouldn't be that if you get it for 1 year, the following year you don't. It would be assumed, unless there were issues, that installation is reinstalled. The bollards would come up in November or ahead of the winter. The driver feedback signs or some of the other measures would not. So those would stay in place. The bollards, though, would need to come up as part of winter maintenance.
And so we can pick an additional road then. Van Order, everything's good, all the feedback's positive. So in the long run, we could have a whole bunch of streets in our districts having bollards. Is that really what we want as a city, having bollards up everywhere?
Thanks, Councillor Doherty, for the question. So in terms of the process, you're correct. The bollards would stay up again as kind of a default process. The traffic calming bollards are, from where we have implemented them so far, and in terms of the data that we've collected as part of this process in developing the guidelines are an effective tool to reduce speeds along local roads in neighborhoods across the city. So it certainly is one tool as part of the minor adjustment measures that we would consider. It wouldn't always be the most appropriate tool for every single district selected street that's put forward. So we would consider other tools as well, depending on the context of that particular street and area. But certainly the bollards are one important aspect of the minor adjustment measures, type 1 measures that we've developed as part of the guidelines and policy.
Thank you. Chair, I have 2 more questions, really short.
2 more questions. Before I'll give other people a chance and they'll come back to you at the end. Does anyone else have any questions I was thinking more about policy. It can be how it applies to your district, but it really should be high level questions about how the policy works, because we've got we've got lots of time to deal with all the questions. And there are representatives from the districts here that would wish to speak as well. So I'm trying to keep things moving.
I was just using that as an example.
Yeah, no, I know. I don't see any other hands. So Councillor Doherty, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I was just trying to use that as an example because I have a visual of it, and I just imagine more and more roads in any of our districts having all these bollards up. So when it comes to larger projects, capital projects, with councillors, when we door knock, we hear of all the roads that need work. And I found it helpful that I met with you at the beginning of my term and showed you the roads. But of course, you've heard of them in previous years. I guess what I'm getting at is when Utilities Kingston does work, do they always reach out to you and say, we're working on this road? Is this on your list that you've previously heard of concerns, and do you take advantage of that at that time?
So I may turn that over to, I see Sheila and Ian have their hand up. So I will turn that over to Commissioner Kidd.
Commissioner Kidd, you have the floor.
Why, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Utilities Kingston doesn't always, because some of their work is unplanned and in response to an emergency repair. But every year, engineering, transportation, and utilities do collaborate to try the best that we can to align the projects where underground work is required with the most ideal street where the surface work is required, and that's been happening for years. It's gotten more complex as we add active transportation in. So now we're not just looking at resurfacing the road top, but we're looking at changing the right of way so that we can add active transportation where possible. So we do collaborate on that. It doesn't always work as perfectly as possible, because the life cycle of a road doesn't always line up to the timelines that utilities might need to work on. But we do that, and we will continue to do that as we move forward.
Great, thanks. Thanks.
Okay, well, let's move to the next item. Item 7, business. There's only one item of business. It's what we've been already discussing because it was the subject of the briefing. So 7A, traffic calming policy and guidelines. The report is with us. The report contains recommendation to council that would come from us. It has 3 clauses. We're not going to move it right now because we're going to questions first. So now questions in order about the report, and you'll notice there's several exhibits attached to the report. So anything that's in the report, anything in the exhibits, how this is going to be a change for us, and any district related questions as well. It's all in order. However, I'll just remind everyone, we do have 3 members of the public here that would like to speak. And so I hate it when they have to come last. So we do have a round of questions now, but you're also able to ask questions during deliberations. So keep that in mind. So questions and questions only. If you start talking to how you're going to vote on the recommendation or that kind of thing, I will cut you off. But questions are in order. Who wants to ask more questions about the implementation, the policy, or any of it? Councillor Doherty.
Honestly, last question. Can you just help us visualize this pace card? I'm not sure if I understood that pace card properly.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thanks for the question, Councillor Doherty. So happy to give you a sense of that. So the PACE car program, as it's been implemented in other municipalities, is centered around kind of two aspects. So one is that there is essentially a pledge, so to speak, or an agreement, general agreement that a resident will follow or agree to follow the posted speed limits that are in the neighborhood. So there's kind of that educational piece and pledge that residents would be able to take. And as part of that, they would be able to get essentially a decal that they can put on the back of their vehicle to indicate that they are supportive and will drive at the posted speed limit in all kind of posted areas and streets in the city, and would encourage others to do so as well, by displaying that particular decal. So that's generally speaking how it works. There's a pledge, and then that opportunity to kind of demonstrate to the rest of the community that that they're committed to drive it at the posted speed limits across the city.
Thank you. So it's not exactly the way it works in NASCAR. It's like a sticker you put on your car if you volunteer, and you're telling everyone that you drive the speed limit. Everybody knows someone like that always drives exactly the speed limit or below. So now they can advertise that and contribute to traffic calming. Be interesting to see what the uptake is. Any other questions for staff before we move to deliberations and hear from the public? Okay, so we'll go to the public now. So the members of the public, each of you have 5 minutes. You can speak, you can ask questions, you can make comments, you can address the committee, whatever you want to do. You have 5 minutes total each. And at the end of all of your public comments, the staff will answer all the questions sort of in one go. So they won't answer you directly the way they've been doing with us. It's like all of the public's questions get answered in one session. So there's basically 3 members of the public here, I believe. I see there's a hand up. So we'll go first to Ms. Sharkey. Turn on your screen. Okay, there we go. And just go ahead. You've got 5 minutes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tara, and I am speaking tonight as a representative of the Sydenham District Association. I am also a parent at École Cathedral, which is at the heart of our comments this evening. So first off, I would like to thank the members of the Environment, Infrastructure, and Transportation Committee for taking comments tonight on the newly proposed traffic calming policy, and would like to commend the city staff for taking on this task of streamlining things and making it more efficient for everyone. And a special thank you to Matt, who addressed some of my questions by phone. So the Sydenham District Association began looking more in detail at the newly proposed traffic calming policy and the survey as a result of the measures currently being implemented at Johnson and Barry outside of École Cathedral. So we would like to submit the following comments in particular about this trial location. First, I would like to say that I won't go over them orally, but as part of our submission, we did make comments on the survey, and perhaps that's something that goes to community engagement and more related to that. So I will skip that commentary that we submitted, but we'll go on to address the heart of the matter that we wanted to bring up, which is the measures at École Cathedral. So in regards to the new policy, the advanced community input meeting was removed from the proposed process with the rationale that many residents disagree on the correct measures, which is now leading the city to begin implementing these level 1 measures after distributing flyers to the local residents only. And we believe that there is a specific area where this method is not sufficient, and that is schools. Because schools have a wider community than only the residents who live near them, we believe it's imperative to give them an adequate amount of time and discussion into the input of traffic calming measures. For example, the suggested traffic calming measures implemented at Johnson and Barry did not include the most obvious of changes, a speed limit reduction of the kind that the city has implemented at other schools. As noted on the city's webpage titled Neighborhood Traffic, quote unquote, the city began reducing speed limits in school zones in 2012, and by the end of 2013, most school zones in the city will be posted with 40-kilometer-per-hour signs. Now, Johnson and Barry is a prime location where a case-by-case decision should have been used, as is indicated on page 3 of the 2011 guidelines for establishing posted speed limits, because it's an artery or an arterial road, I guess. So it is a sort of unique situation, and an advance meeting for the school, which allowed parents of children as well as staff, administration, and adjacent neighbors, is probably the best process for this situation and possibly other schools. However, since there was no advanced discussion with the school council or survey of parents, the concerns of these stakeholders were left out of the process.
Mr. Key, you're at 5 minutes, so I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap up. Okay,
sorry. The other part that I guess part of it is that there's some multiple policies and procedures that are overlapping at this particular spot. You're dealing with the traffic calming measures, you're dealing with the active transportation plan, and you're dealing with the speed limits. And because of that, I think that this area and schools in general, they need more advanced commentary from the local public, and not just notifying the school board that something is going to happen. And the suggested measures that were in the active transportation, the Park and Stride and the safe school routes, they all incorporate advanced communications. And so it seems really odd. And I feel that this example, this trial run at École Cathedral is a very good example of how this can inform the process moving forward, because I don't think that the end result is really the best result. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharkey. There's 2 other members of the public here, I believe. If you would like to speak, either turn on your video and raise your hand, or use the raise hand function in Zoom, which I believe, oh, I see your hand. So Mr. Mitchell's got his raise hand function activated. So you're up next and you have 5 minutes.
Good evening, councilors. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I hadn't intended to speak, but I'd like to speak about one aspect just through the briefing and just the comments that I'd like to raise. And it's an issue that, or rather a matter that we were going to address separately, but if we start at the very beginning of any city process, and in the city departments, at some point there's going to be a public engagement moment. And so I'm speaking mostly as someone who was an accessibility rep on the public engagement process. And so I'm pretty familiar with that document and what we had decided to do. And so I've contacted Debbie Miller, who's the communications and public engagement staffer, about this. But why I'm speaking tonight is actually mostly to do with a variety of reactions to this initiative. And I think it's also in this initiative, and I'm just want to sort of throw out a bit of a caution. So at some point when the city decides to go to the public, there's this hierarchy of decisions as that staff will determine, and each department determines it differently. So most of us are very used to the planning department process under Commissioner Agnew, which is very proactive about the way they engage the public. But staff are supposed to determine to what degree do we engage the public, which stakeholder groups do we go to, et cetera. And I think there's evidence that you've heard from Ms. Sharkey tonight that seems to have broken down in this communication process. The other thing about that is that there's a sort of I'm going to jump to a little bit later thought, but there's sort of a paternalistic style about all of this, as though that the science, the theoretical, the cutting edge planners, engineers, and everybody know best. And so they're going to unfold this program. So it's not really a public engagement program. It's really, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do kind of program. And then it sort of seeps in a little bit to the councillors who are going to pick exactly what street. You know, and we look at the language that's used about each councillor gets to select one street a year. And I want to come back to the public, because your richest resource is actually the public. And if you go to them first early and you engage them the right way, you're going to learn so much lived experience and information that then allows you to make better decisions. And that's how the public engagement framework is supposed to work. So this is one of 3 public engagements I've noticed recently where we have as a city brought decisions to the public already basically formed. And then the public has reacted strongly, I'll use, without putting any charged words, because you're trying to tell them what you want to do. And so I will offer that in relation to the intersection that Ms. Sharkey's talking about, we made a choice a few years ago to put an express bus on that corner. That choice may or may not be correct. It may not be correct to have 2 bus stops within 1 block of each other. But rather than examine that or talk to people about all of the factors, what we've decided to do is to move into a traffic calming decision. So we can unpack this a lot more, but I'll jump ahead to Councillor Holland's district and where I have fears. We finished the 3rd crossing and all of a sudden we realized there are 8 or 9 locations in North Kingstown now where people are trying to turn what were quieter streets all of a sudden into ways to get into the downtown core quickly. And then all of a sudden residents realize that, but you only get one choice for that area because you only get your one choice per year, or there's other initiatives involved. And so then I'm going to come back just to the full final piece, and it's kind of linked to the bollards that Councillor Doherty mentioned. It may not be our ultimate decision for what we want aesthetically for the city. And there are many, many other considerations as well. And so if you want a positive outcome, I believe what we as a city set up in the public engagement framework, we get to people, we get all of the information, we gather it, and we all make the decision together. So I can't speak to the 3 decision pieces that you're doing tonight, but I will speak to, I have a few concerns that this process seemed to have derailed, and I do have a few concerns that that same type of decision-making is inherent in the document itself, but I think we can fix it if we go back to that public engagement framework type way of unfolding these decisions so that each engagement is unfolded that way at the right hierarchy or level of engagement. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I see that the other public member is no longer here. Madam Clerk, is there any other public in attendance that might want to speak?
Mr. Chair, I do only see the 2 members currently with us.
So we'll
no
go
other
to
members.
Okay, thanks. Welcome, Councillor Senek. We'll go to staff now to respond to the two public submissions and questions and concerns that they raised. Any member of staff may speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I'll just pick up on one piece as it relates to the policy. I don't have any specific questions that I heard to respond to, but I just wanted to touch on specifically the school aspect and communications with schools. So it's certainly our intent as part of the district selected street process and other measures to incorporate the schools as part of that information sharing process. And certainly, you know, if doing work in a school area would ensure that the schools themselves are aware, so that they can share that with you know, with parents and students that use that particular piece of road or area, you know, daily for school commute. So I just wanted to touch on that piece. I'll let Mr. Semple or anyone else jump in if there's anything else to respond to, but otherwise I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Mr. Semple, did you have anything else to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think just to build on some of the comments that have been made as it relates to the traffic calming process and policy that we're talking about tonight, but also some of the discussion we had as it fits into the broader ways that we address transportation issues. So there are instances where the city may need to address a safety concern that would follow through that process that Mr. Cusson outlined, where we review that concern and look to make adjustments and changes to address that immediate safety issue that may be at play. The selection by a district councillor of a street to have type 1 installations on it is not the only type of interventions that would be undertaken. As we would be working through school zone issues, we have other programs that run, such as related to pedestrian crossing upgrades, in addition to all of the other capital upgrade programs that are running, some of which Commissioner Kidd alluded to, where the tools that now exist in the guidelines and those expanded tools, but in particular those type 2 engineering measures, those measures also get incorporated as part of those longer term multi-year plans in the reconstruction of what happens. And so as it relates to engagement and consultation, certainly, you know, each street and the issues that exist on each street, not every transportation issue will need to be or can be addressed by a district selected street. And staff in the city respond to every transportation concern that comes in and evaluate it to determine what action needs to happen. Some of which may be moving it into the community-based programs or ensuring the district councillor knows about it as part of something that could be selected on a local road. But that information also would feed into the capital projects and the many other processes that we run as part of that integrated transportation approach. And the city's engagement framework and the way that we engage in all of those things certainly applies across the board.
Thank you. Any other questions for members of the committee before we move into deliberations? Because Councillor Senek hasn't had a chance. So we're at questions. We've heard from members of the public, and you've got a chance to ask questions as well about the report and the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sorry I was late. And through you, just one question to staff, and that is, what's the police saying? Like, we've been, you know, our traffic calming measures can only go so far. Like, they can only go so far. Like, the police, they have to be catching speeders, you know, like on the local streets. Like, what's the police saying? Or are we even asking the police for assistance in traffic calming?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Osanek, and through you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So the city's transportation department with the police in sharing concerns that come up all the time. So if we have issues that we're aware of, or more importantly, issues that have started to develop because of a change in conditions, we share that information with police. We encourage residents to contact them if there's something that needs to be addressed from an enforcement standpoint. The traffic calming measures, when traffic calming measures are installed, the goal of those measures is to slow vehicles down. So that is consistent with what the police are also looking for as it relates to those areas. Whether they're the minor adjustment measures or some of the engineered measures that come later on with redesign, they all support a culture of reduced speed on those streets and shifting it away from a vehicle-centric focus to pedestrians and cyclists and the many other users that are there. When we install, I think if part of the question is, are we installing traffic calming measures and then not worrying about enforcement because the traffic calming measures are there? That's not what we do from the city standpoint. When we install measures and when we make changes in the transportation network, we inform the police of those changes and at times ask them to support that so that we can reinforce the behaviors that we're seeing and that the measures are attempting to address. A recent example of that is around the Elginburg Public Schools. So we had some measures that were installed on Unity Road, but we also had support from Kingston Police and others sort of in reinforcing those behaviors while those changes were being made.
Thank you. My second question for you, Mr. Chair, I guess is more like if the police were effectively enforcing speeds, we wouldn't need to do the traffic calming. So I guess that's more where I was getting at, like Woodbine Road. It doesn't have any traffic calming, no traffic calming, but the city has heard the residents' concerns about speeding traffic. The police have heard concerns about speeding cars, and yet they're never there catching speeders. And so like, it's just so futile. And so what are the police, like, can anyone be honest and say that the police have too few, they're too stretched, they don't have enough police officers to enforce traffic because they're too busy with the downtown scene, with whatever's going on, for drugs, and can anyone be honest and just say why the police aren't out there enforcing so that the councillors and the residents across Kingston don't have to go begging for traffic calming measures? Like if the police were just there enforcing, so I guess it's just.
So Councillor, that's really a comment, and it's also directed at the Chief of Police. So I'm not sure what you expect transportation staff to say about that, but if Commissioner Kidd, you're welcome to take a crack, but I was going to say that question's out of order because we don't have anyone here to answer that question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm basically going to have to echo that. I hear the frustration. We hear it all the time. We've had conversations with police and we engage them as Mr. Semple has indicated. I do not ever want to speak on behalf of Kingston Police, but I don't believe there are enough staff, and I think traffic calming takes a lower priority to some of the other issues that the police are dealing with in the community. I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with what Councillor Osanek is saying, but the only time we've had a chance to address that directly is when we did the red light camera debate, and there was a motion of council asking the police to come and explain traffic enforcement and how it would differ with red light cameras or without, and it gave us a chance to sort of ask more questions about enforcement, and then we find reports from like cities like Toronto where someone in the police said that they haven't done traffic enforcement in that city for years. So, you know, I really think that's a higher level question that council needs to directly address at some point. Maybe through a council motion, and Councillor Senker, you're welcome to try to write one, and I'm happy to help you with that and second it if you would like. But it's not really subject. You're absolutely correct that there's only so much traffic calming we can do, but it's not really subject of the recommendation or the report, unfortunately. I'll have to leave it there for now. So we've heard also from members of the public. I guess the best thing now is to just get the recommendation on the floor, and then we can go into deliberations. Everyone can have a chance to speak. Remember, it's committee, so there's no limit on commentary. So I guess I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Hall and second by Councillor Neal. So I'll read it, that the EITP committee recommend that council direct staff to implement the updated traffic calming program as outlined in report number EITP 21-014, and that the EITP committee recommend that council adopt the updated traffic calming policy as outlined in Exhibit A of report number EITP 21-014, and that the EITP committee recommend that council adopt the updated traffic calming guidelines as outlined in Exhibit B of report number EITP 21-014. And a reminder that we heard during the briefing that there is also an Exhibit C attached to the report, which summarizes by theme the public engagement that the city has done so far on this file. So it's on the floor. And I will start a speakers list. I believe everyone will probably want to say something, and we may need a couple of rounds, but you'll have 5 minutes per shot. Who wants to go first? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I think it's, well, first of all, I commend staff for trying something new, because we know the previous system didn't work. It was actually felt wrong to put streets forward for street calming measures or testing or whatever we were doing, because we knew that those streets were never going to actually see any kind of street calming measures introduced. So I'm glad we're trying something new. I am a bit concerned that we'll end up with all of these bollards in our districts, and I'm not sure if that's really what we want. And Mr. Mitchell from the public who presented as well echoed that kind of concern. But so I am wondering if we're also going to be reevaluating. I hope we're going to reevaluate this in a few years' time, maybe 3 years or so. And I also, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Next up is Councillor Neal.
Thank you. A couple of things. Everybody wants traffic calming. Many people think they want speed bumps on their streets. That seems to get old pretty fast with people, at least in my district. And so I'm looking forward to finding ways to achieve that without necessarily putting in a whole series of speed bumps. So I appreciate that. In the past, one of my frustrations when we named two streets was that often that was the last we heard of it. And then we'd have to send an email year and a half later, only to be told, oh, it didn't meet the required warrants for that. So I'm really looking forward to staff keeping district councillors apprised of how it's going. And if it doesn't meet the parameters that you've set to make it a viable street to experience traffic calming, please let us know. And we may argue with your decision, but at least when constituents contact us, we can respond knowledgeably. So those were my only two comments.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Any of the other present members of the committee wish to speak? Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll just start off by saying that I think others have said as well that the ongoing discussion and education opportunities that we've had with city staff have been really great. I know that each time there were like a bunch of neighborhood concerns coming up, each time staff were involved and had conversations with residents, everyone took a lot away from that experience. And I think had a better understanding of the complexity of, it's not just about cars, it's about human behavior and the fact that what seems like a very straightforward solution to at the outset might be a problem or might not have the desired outcome. And so I just want to thank staff because I think those conversations in the past, at least in my district, have been very helpful, and that continued focus on education is much appreciated. Through things like the pace car initiative and the lawn signs, I know at first glance, you might think, well, it's not, members of the community might think, well, that's not very much. And we really just want a very firm hand involved here, and that's not going to do it. But I think it is a good solution. I think educating the public and making every individual aware of their own behavior is a really important step. I was just today, it was like a terrifying experience driving along Bath Road, and I encountered one intersection and a car ran right through a red light. And then the car that came up behind them, I sort of looked over thinking like, oh, we'll exchange a glance and sort of suggest to each other that was terrible behavior. And then the next intersection we got to, that car went right through the red light. So the fact is there are lots of people out there on the roadway, and for whatever reason, they're not paying attention to the rules, and having lots of enforcement would be ideal, but we all know we can't afford the level of enforcement that we need. So taking the approach of education seems to be a really wise move. Yeah, I mean, like everyone else, I wish that every street that I first put forward when I was elected had been dealt with. I wouldn't be receiving the same emails, wouldn't be having the same conversations. We understand why that didn't work. And I feel confident that in the future, there will be, well, let's hope. I mean, the individual problem streets, there's enough there to continue to work with staff on those. But the bigger issue really is about educating the public and making sure that people start to behave in a certain way because it benefits everyone. That would be my overall message. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Holland. I haven't heard from Councillor Osterhoff yet. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just will echo each of the comments there that I've heard from my colleagues, and commend the city staff, Matt and his crew, and Ian, and I think they've done a good job. I think that, I mean, I'm less impacted, besides from the rural area, we have to drive in, and so we are impacted because we are the drivers, but I do appreciate the attention that they give. I thought they do bring closer attention to the areas that need it. I experienced their help considerably at Elginburg School, so I learned how they do their work, and in collaboration with the police too, that did a great job in dealing with a bit of a crisis there early on in the school year. So I've experienced their attention and their strategies. So I guess I see, as Councillor Holland said, that there's going to be some real good community benefits here, and the education is good, and that I like the idea that it's a bit of a working document. They're willing to look at it and reevaluate it along the way and make changes. So that works for me. Thank you.
Councillor. Councillor Sanders, did you wish to say something in deliberations? Okay, Councillor Neal, will you take the chair so I can make my comments?
I will indeed, and I recognize you.
Yeah. Right. Well, in Sydenham District, traffic calming, as you heard from members of SDA that presented tonight, the only two members of the public that did speak to us tonight. It's a big deal in Sydenham. We are in Sydenham, we have a walk score of 100 in some areas, 100 out of 100, which means you can walk to every single destination you might need in your life. They're all within walking distance. That's what walk score 100 means. We have the main campus of Queens, which is a heavy pedestrian area, as we know, because we put a scramble crossing there, right, Jim? You know, it is, I regularly, it was a big part of my campaign, on both my campaigns for election, to do something about pedestrian safety, you know, and this is one of those times I get to see that in action. So it's basically all that to say that it's extremely important to residents of Sydenham that something be done about this. And what I'm hearing from all of you, all my colleagues, is that it's extremely important in your districts as well. In fact, I've heard it said before, perhaps not without hyperbole, that that speeding of motor vehicles might be one of the top 3 problems in the city today, and probably not just in Kingston. So, and we're hearing from Councillor Stroff that it happens in Elginburg and other hamlets in his district as well. So that means that every single district is affected. And so staff has taken that seriously, and they've come up with this excellent report, very thorough, and some measures, a toolkit and so on. It's a lot more evolved from earlier mentions of this, and some really good work has obviously gone into this. So I echo those comments as well. I do have a couple high level comments. So, things have gotten so bad in my district that I really wonder big picture sometimes about certain things. Like, why is it that Brock and Johnson Street are the way that they are? Why are they like that? Why are they speedways? Like, didn't we do that to ourselves? I think we did. Not us, but the city did that to the city. The city took those residential streets and turned them into arterials. That happened. So at some point we have to consider reversing that. For the safety of the thousands of people. Those are all residential streets. They're a residential street from top to bottom, except for the school that Ms. Sharkey mentioned. You know, and Hotel Dew a little further down, and something right at the bottom of Johnson is not residential, but essentially Johnson is residential for its entire length, and it's a very long street. And the average speed is 80 to 90 kilometers an hour every single day. And there's a school zone there. Okay, but we did that to ourselves. The city did that, and I'd like to know why we don't consider reversing those decisions, going back to two-way streets there. Who's it going to kill? It's going to save lives, actually. You know, and if we're not going to go to two-way, why don't we put a transit lane, a dedicated transit lane in each of those streets, like CEO Hurdle suggested herself to me personally? Why don't we do that? It's time for, if the police aren't going to do anything, it's time for some serious high-level action on this. None of this is meant to infer that I'm going to vote against the recommendation. I did consider perhaps deferring or amending, because I don't think it's going far enough. I do appreciate the work, but I'm getting a little tired on year 7 of my years on council of having this broken record continue on with you know, the usual assurances and promises and very little real action. Councillor Doherty got bollards on Van Order Drive. I noticed that when I went to visit my mother, just out of the blue. I was wondering whether you had heard about it. Apparently they just popped up overnight, and even the district councillor didn't know about it. That's not a way to do a trial. And the same thing happened at Cold Cathedral. That's not the way to do a trial either. However, I got to admit, if I'm honest, that at least something is being done, as Councillor Doherty said, trying something new. So overall, it sounds like the committee is a little bit peeved that the councillors are peeved because we haven't really been involved, but we do recognize good work when we see it. So that's sort of the two themes that I'm hearing from you guys. That's what I'd like to echo those comments as well. And I'd like to suggest that we need a motion to council about traffic enforcement by the police. Yes or no? Is it going to happen? Yes or no? Like Councillor Osanik said, yes or no, is it going to happen? If it's no, we move on to other measures. And if they're not traffic, if it's not engineered traffic calming, then it's something else. But I'd just like to say this. When a civil engineer goes to university, what do you think they learn in the road building segments? They learn how to build fast roads. They don't learn how to build slow roads, right? They learn how to build fast roads. They're not learning in school how to keep speeds at human levels that aren't going to kill children. They don't learn that, or at least not very much. Or we would have we would have those engineering solutions already on all of our residential streets. It's really strange that we have to retrofit our city to save lives. To me, it is really strange, especially seeing as we hear about this all the time from residents. So that's enough. I'm turning into a bit of a tirade. I'm going to support the recommendation. It's a step in the right direction. The trials are a step in the right direction. None of it has included very much input from us, but clearly staff has heard us constantly complain. So they're getting their feedback in that sense. But if public engagement really needs to, you heard from both, that was the topic of both of the public comments today, was the lack of real public engagement. You know, telling a school board that you're putting in a trial at their school is not public engagement. I'm sorry, I have to agree there. And yeah, so that's all I'm going to say for now. I will support the recommendation, and I urge staff to be more like, as Mr. Mitchell said, more like Commissioner Agnew's department, where they really work proactively with all parties, public and developers, to try to find any kind of a consensus or some middle ground before things get presented to council. We do appreciate that, and all planning members appreciate that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stroud. And I totally agree and I've been lobbying for a few years now that Johnson and Brock going back to a two-way traffic would be the best measure for traffic calming on those streets. And if it's something that staff can bring forward as a recommendation, that's great. If not, I'd be happy to second a motion if you want to bring that to council. So thank you. The chair is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Does anyone want a second round of comments before we vote on the recommendation? I think we've identified that we've got work outside this committee to do on this general type of initiative. Things that are above and beyond what's here will have to be dealt with through council motions. So with that said, I will call the question on the recommendation, all three clauses. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Back to the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any motions, notices of motion?
Mr. Chair, no, there's not.
Any other business from the committee on EITP matters only? Seeing none, there was one item of correspondence on the addendum. It's already been accepted. The next meeting is August 3rd in the heat of the summer, 6 p.m. I presume it'll be another Zoom meeting. And that's it. So I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Neal, Councillor Osterhoff, all those in favor? And that carries. Good luck, Habs. So see you next time, guys.